Ooh, basketball, little college basketball. Going to leave that one a little bit on the burner for tomorrow. Don't want to go. We went pretty hard on college basketball yesterday. We'll pull back a little bit today. We'll go more NBA, talk about the Mavs and their trade deadline needs. We'll get into some NFL talk, and the last head coach position has been hired, and it affects the Cowboys. We'll get into that, some quarterback talk as well, all coming up here on the Sports Complex and a whole lot more. Jerry Hamilton was on Ian Robbie. We'll play you that audio as well. And, of course, your text messages, 512-447-3776. 512-447-3776. You guys drive the show. I just try to keep it on the rails. All we got to do is send in those texts of whatever you guys want to talk about, and we'll talk about it on the show because that's what we like to do. We read everybody's text, and if you give us a good reason and a good conversation and a hot take, or you got some question or whatever you want to put in there, text it in. We'll also get to Patrick's big fat poll of the day today as well. Keeping it rolling on a Thursday as we get closer to the weekend, and a weekend with no NFL football because the Super Bowl, we get the Pro Bowl. Maybe we'll talk some Pro Bowl tomorrow. I haven't done a ton of looking into it. I know Gardner Minshew's a Pro Bowler, so that should tell you what it is, and it's a, flag football. I don't think I think it's like the skills competition. I was always a fan of the skills competition. I always thought those were fun. So I'm not a hater on the skills competitions. I think those are a cool, different way to showcase, some of the talents of what these guys can do and the stuff they practice. And I'm always a fan of the skills competition, but I have to keep looking what they are because they change around. And there's some that are fun, and then some they're like, well, we're trying to get O&D linemen involved, and they may not have the same abilities. You don't want to do anything where anybody gets hurt. So, but I'll tell you what, I'll look through those, and we'll talk about those tomorrow because we'll have the Pro Bowl coming up. We do have some college all-star games as well. The East-West Shrine Bowl is tonight at 7 if you want to watch that. If you're doing your early mock drafting and all of your early looks at who's going to be in the NFL next year and these college players, not a lot of Longhorns in this game tonight. Ryan Watts is going to be the only Longhorn playing tonight. JT Sanders and Jonathan Brooks were both selected and took invites to the Shrine Bowl. JT Sanders pulled out pretty last minute. Jonathan Brooks clearly still recovering from injury, so he is not able to play in the game. But Ryan Watts will be playing for the West team. So if you want to watch tonight, the West team will have Ryan Watts on it at the Shrine Bowl, 7 o'clock tonight. Of course, the Senior Bowl is Saturday at noon. You can check that one out. Tavondre Sweat and Christian Jones, both at that. The practices, the clips you've been seeing, and the conversations coming out is both those guys showing up really well at the Senior Bowl. For Tavondre Sweat and Christian Jones, the videos of Tavondre Sweat bending people back at, in all the drills. Christian Jones was holding his own, and apparently his stock was rising a lot yesterday. Tavondre Sweat, I think his stock is rising today. He's been one of those guys. Byron Murphy, who was another Senior Bowl invite, but due to injury took the idea to not go and play in the game, get ready for the combine. But his stock, he has been listed as a first-round pick in a lot of drafts. Tavondre Sweat, not in all the mock drafts as he had been a first-round pick. He is trying to show why he should be. Of note, Jalen Ford, Jordan Whittington also accepted invites to the Senior Bowl, but will not be part of the roster on Saturday. So you will see Tavondre Sweat and Christian Jones on that on Saturday. We'll mention that again tomorrow. I believe they're both in the American team. I think that's what they're both on. I'll look it up, and we'll get it to you tomorrow. But that is the Senior Bowl on Saturday. The East-West Shrine Bowl is tonight if you want to watch some football on a Thursday night. These are the for as much as people don't, like how bowl games don't matter, a lot of these guys are trying to boost draft stock. And for a guy like Ryan Watts, who right now is going undrafted in most people's minds, and maybe he's a late round pick, a 6th or a 7th, but he's they think maybe he'll be undrafted, and it's going to depend on if he's willing to go to safety, because some people don't think he may have the speed to be able to do an NFL cornerback's job full time. So depending on what he does, but he's apparently willing to do it. But Ryan Watts, you see him go out there. He's trying to play for a spot where he's going to try and make an impact and move himself up into the draft because, man, being drafted is a special thing, and it's not something a lot of people get to do. So Ryan Watts will be going for that tonight, and all those guys will. So those are usually pretty fun games. I know no one's trying to hurt anybody, and it may not be the most cohesive game, but there's a lot of talent and a lot of guys out there trying to prove what they can do. So pretty good stuff there. As far as college basketball, there was a couple games in the Big 12 last night. There was one big one. Baylor took on UCF. Baylor gets the win 77-69 on the road at UCF. Langston Love coming off the bench was the big scorer for Baylor in that game. He goes 6 for 11 from the field, 5 of 7 for 3, puts up 24 points in a big win for Baylor. To get a win on the road, which we've said a million times, is very hard in the Big 12. UCF also just doesn't play aggressively enough against Baylor, against a team that doesn't really play a ton of defense. Like they're an offensive team. They're not built around their defense. Yet UCF wasn't able to go in there and play aggressively enough. Baylor wins points in the paints 30-16. They play more aggressively. Baylor ends up shooting 25 free throws. They shoot 20 of 25. UCF shoots 1 of 7 from their free throws. Not a good look for UCF. That's where you have to get a little bit more aggressive, go in the paint. And if they're not, fouling you, and you should be able to get layups. So, you have to be able to get the easier shots or get the fouls. One of those things. It's a thing, for Texas in games they've played well. They've been able to get to the free throw line and hit free throws. It's just a standard part of basketball, especially in college when the game is refed differently each game. You have to continue to find where the seams are and adjust to them and get those baskets. And for UCF, I think they're finding it going to the Big 12 where it is, I think, playing against so many different styles and, it's a big difference of, okay, every week you're going up against a top talented guys, but instead of, last game, we were playing over the weekend on Saturday. We're playing a team that is all about defense, and they're not trying to score. And then all of a sudden we go against a team that's all about offense, and they're not fouling us. So we're going in and flying over the paint and not paying attention. But Baylor gets that win there for a big win on the road. Every road win in the Big 12 is big at this point, as we've seen so many upsets early in the season. Rodney Terry spoke today and did have this is separation month. He says February is separation month, where this is the teams where you start to get those road wins, you start to pull away. Let's hope Texas is on the right side of that separation. Need to get a couple wins here next week and pull themselves back to 500 in conference play, and from there, you're set to where you need to be able to get going forward in the right direction. That's where Texas needs to be aiming for. In NBA action last night, we saw the Magic beat the Spurs 108-98. Paolo Banchero ends up with 25-9-7. Franz Wagner 28-5. But the reality was for the Spurs, again, they just don't have the depth required to go a full 48 minutes in the NBA right now, especially if someone's hurt. They've been getting better and closer to it. Keldon Johnson was out last night. That second unit was hurting without him. Not being able to bring him off the bench, it showed. And while they were up 11 to start, in the first quarter, they got up 11. And then Orlando basically took the game back over. It was around close at halftime. And when the starting lineup was in, the Spurs would be doing well. And when the starting lineup would go out, it would get really bad. And you just keep seeing, as much as you watch Victor Wembanyama and the highlights on the offensive end, man, what he can do defensively and just being a 7'4", 7'5" guy with athleticism and basketball IQ, being around the basket. He just keeps, pushing away people and making it harder. And you add in a Jeremy Sohan into that, who's been playing better defense and getting, a little bit more consistent as the season goes on. Still a young guy. I've been on the record, not his biggest fan, but I'm a Spurs fan, so I'm hoping for the best. He's been consistently getting better at, if he's able to put a body and stay in front of somebody, Wemby will be there to give him the back end help. So that, they're still progressing in the right direction, but this is not going to be their season, clearly. We also saw the Rockets drop one to the Pelicans, 110-99. The Rockets just did not bring the intensity and the energy in this game. They get out rebounded 56-29. There was 50 points in the paint for the Pelicans. We talked about the trade needs for the Rockets yesterday, and we talked about them needing a rim protector and some inside help. This was what they went for in the game. The Pelicans, 50 points in the paint, and just killing him rebounding as well. Where as good as Alperen Şengün is, he needs to get a little bit tougher in there. He bully balls guys that he can bully ball, but then when the game gets a little bit quicker, he's having a hard time adjusting to it. But on the good side for the Rockets, Jalen Green, another good performance as he's starting to break out of a slump that he was in for most of the beginning of the season. He goes for 31, 4 and 4. He goes 5 of 12 from three-point land, but he's getting better and better. He's still not a finished product, but you were seeing him go, take 12 threes early in the season and maybe hit 2. So you're seeing that pick up. You're seeing him get more shots open and be a little bit more aggressive on both sides of the ball. He's still got a long way to go, but now he's at the point where you may hand off, stay back a little bit more about trying to trade him at the trade deadline, which has been discussed, and there still is time. It's February 8th is the trade deadline. We're at February 1 now. So once we get to, next week, we'll see even more and more for next Thursday when that trade deadline hits. If any of those guys are on the line, I don't know how much movement we're going to see of big players. We've already seen the Pascal Siakam trade. That felt like it was probably going to be one of the biggest. OG Anunoby, we've already seen trade. The Raptors were pretty much the biggest team that had real top-tier players that they were willing to get rid of. I don't know how much, the smaller teams, there's teams that are going down and starting to get bad and giving off players. That doesn't seem to be too many of those. The Mavericks played last night. We'll get into their look at the trade deadline. The Mavericks get a big loss last night, 121-87, but you were not expecting anything. You're playing the number one team in the West. No Luka, no Kyrie. They shoot 20% from three-point percentage. You don't expect a lot when Luka and Kyrie are both out for the Mavericks, but it gives you that point that there's still more things they need, and there's a couple reasons the Mavs need more things. One, they want to compete. They do want to be a competitive team. They now have new ownership, and Mark Cuban still says he's steering the ship, but there is new ownership for the Mavericks. So they're going to be looking to try and, rejuvenate the fan base and get people pumped up for it again, show that they have, they're willing to spend the money and come out and play ball to get this team where they need to be. But in that fact, you have to be able to keep Luka Doncic. And at the end of the day, the reality of that is, even if you're not necessarily always doing the best thing, you have to kind of keep taking shots, because in today's age, a lot of these superstars would prefer you keep taking shots and listening to them and trying to help them than standing still saying, well, in time, this will work out. We'll get our draft picks back. The Mavs are in not a great place, having only a first and 2 seconds available to trade, but that is enough to make some moves, just not a big superstar move. They also have guys that people are interested in. Tim Hardaway Jr. is a piece for a team that's contending to get an energy bench scorer. Tim Hardaway Jr. is great for that. Grant Williams has not worked out well there, but other teams may figure they can get him back to where he was with the Celtics. So we could see Grant Williams, Jaden Hardy, Josh Green, some young guys that people feel really good about. Omax Prosper, guy they drafted this year, they like him a lot. I don't think they want to get rid of him. I think they'd like to keep him, but if the right deal approaches them, that he's another young player that when you don't have that draft pick, you may be able to say, well, here's this guy, and instead of giving you a draft pick where you don't know what number it's going to be, here's a player that you know what you're getting right away, and he is still young. He's still kind of that draft pick. So that'll be the what you have to offer. Some of the big names they've been looking at, of course, the one that would really, I think, be the best deal for them if they could find a way to pull it off. We talked about the Trailblazers yesterday with the Rockets. Everyone's looking at the Trailblazers right now because they made that big trade for Damian Lillard, and it didn't feel like they're done. But they still got some people on that team that they maybe not be fully ready to use in the future. Jeremy Grant is one of those guys, a really good player, but you don't know where he fits in. If you're going to say this seems to be Anthony Simon's team and it's supposed to be Scoot Henderson coming on, then Jeremy Grant, who's a good player, but maybe he's a little bit older than what your projection is, and his salary could be prohibitive to growing the team. So if you could move him off and get some younger players in there to help out, Jeremy Grant might be a guy. I don't know if they're ready to move him and if the Mavs have enough to go out and get him and really make a trade that the Portland Trailblazers won't refuse. But Jeremy Grant would be one of your best options right now for the Mavs. Another name that's coming out that I think people would like less, but could be a help. Definitely a help scoring, but I don't know if he's another guy that is going to come in and, somewhat be possibly a headache, is Kyle Kuzma. The consistency isn't there. He's not always healthy. Just a lot of the same issues that they're kind of already dealing with Luka and especially with Kyrie. I don't know if adding another piece kind of like that, but the benefit for him is he's affordable. They've come out, the Wizards have said they don't expect 2 firsts for him. So if you're saying, well, now you're in the 1 first ballpark, we can give up 1 first, or maybe we can give you a couple players that's a value of 2 first and make some room and get Kyle Kuzma to come in and be a part of it. That's another option that the Mavs have going for them right now. Dorian Finney-Smith, the player that you trade in the Kyrie Irving trade, he kind of ended up in in Brooklyn. And the problem is when they make the Mikal Bridges trade, they now have 2 small forward, power forward guys that kind of do the same thing and are similar players, and they don't really need both. So maybe you kind of amend that trade and you get Dorian Finney-Smith back, who's a good player, knows the systems, knows how to play under Jason Kidd's coaching, knows the city of Dallas. People already got his jerseys, so he can come back there and play well there. I think that would be a decent pickup if you don't have to give up too much and kind of amend that trade for Kyrie Irving once you add in Mikal Bridges and Cam Johnson and they have too many wings. Give them some other pieces that aren't wings. Maybe a Jaden Hardy they'd be interested in as a young guard with a lot of potential. Maybe that would be someone they're in. Maybe they want a Grant Williams to get him a little bit more size inside. Maybe, if you look at Tim Hardaway Jr., maybe they want another scoring guard that they could bring in. Those are all people you could see brought in for the Mavs at the deadline. Some other names that we'll just throw out there is if they do decide they strike out on all those aren't going to be working for them, and maybe there's a fire sale on some guys that the new regime, if they can make the contracts work out, they'll take the length of the contract and they'll pay the money to add somebody else, even though it may not be the perfect fit. Would be like an Andrew Wiggins, a Miles Bridges, PJ Washington, guys that are not necessarily the most attractive pieces to bring in, whether it's off the court things or on the court things or both for Andrew Wiggins right now, where he's not doing anything off the court, but there was off the court situations. Maybe a new scene for him would be an upgrade. But those are some names of some bigger names you go after. They could go after a backup center as well. Derek Lively's doing pretty well as the rookie, but he can't play the entire game. So to get another big guy in there is another possibility for the Mavs as they get into the trade deadline. It feels like they're a team that is not good enough to really be in the title hunt. Do they play it out and wait for the offseason and hope they can find a better trade and be rational and try and convince Luka, look, man, we get it, but we can't afford to do this because we need to have options when better options become available for us. Well, I don't know if they're going to be able to pull off and wait that long if Luka does get upset and if Luka does want them to make a move before then, but they will have a week basically from today. It's Thursday next week when the trade deadline happens to make those decisions for the Mavs. All right, let's get to Patrick's Big Fat Poll of the day.
Big Fat Poll of the Day on the Horn.
Big Fat Poll of the Day today. Text line 512-447-3776. 512-447-3776 is the text line number. Big Fat Poll of the Day today. We know Dan Quinn is heading to Washington. We'll get to that more in the 5 o'clock hour. But with Dan Quinn heading to Washington, it opens up the D.C. position for Dallas. Who do you want to see? Who should be the next defensive coordinator for Dallas, for the Cowboys? Who should be the next DC? Let us know who you think should be. There's a lot of options. We'll go through them in the 5 o'clock hour with you. But if you've got some that I haven't got in, I'll throw them on my list too. So let's go on that. 512-447-3776. Who should be the next DC for the Cowboys now that Dan Quinn is headed to Washington? Let us know on the text line 512-447-3776. And we'll be right back with a great interview with Jerry Hamilton this morning on Ian Robbie. We come back here on the Horn 1019, AM 1260, the Horn app, and hornfm.com. Back in the Sports Complex here on the Horn. Musical theme of the week is the Grammys, and Grammy winners with over double-digit wins. Bruce Springsteen on that list. Double-digit wins for Bruce Springsteen. Got a few more songs of that before we get to a 512 Friday tomorrow. Keep it rolling right along here on the Sports Complex. Text line's open, 512-447-3776, 512-447-3776. Text poll of the day, who should be the next defensive coordinator for the Cowboys now that Dan Quinn has accepted a job with the Commanders? Who do you think it should be? Some good names. We'll go through them in the 5 o'clock hour. So if you don't know yet, we'll give you a little bit of time. We're also going to play this sound right now. A great interview with Jerry Hamilton from Inside Texas on 3. Does a great job recruiting, talking all sports, football, basketball, talking Texas. Some really good interview this morning from Hook 'em Up with Ian Rob B. It's a Hook 'em Up replay here on the Sports Complex.
Let's go to the Vaqueros hotline and talk football and basketball and all things with Jerry Hamilton, who you know is the senior recruiting analyst at On3 Sports, but he's also now back on the On Texas Football channel at YouTube as of this morning. Congratulations, Jerry, and welcome back. I know you had to sit out for a little bit, but here you are back in there doing your great thing.
It's a lot of fun. They come back on realignment day. That's the day to come back, right?
Yeah, it's always got to be something. What have been your takeaways for our audience that's just tuning in or has not seen the list? I've been going through them. There's just so many 6A, 5A, 4A all the way down, and then some are for certain sports. But what were your takeaways of what we've seen as far as realignment in high school football this morning?
I think for the Lake Travis, Westlake, Dripping Springs, all those fans, it's great, man. You're in the same district, right? Rolling in District 2020 in District 26. They're in 6A. That's the volleyball district, obviously. But no, I think it's I think it's great, man. For that area, that they're in the same district. The one district that's just gonna be brutal is Mesquite Horn gets moved in with Duncanville, DeSoto, who opted to stay 6A, Cedar Hill, Lancaster. I mean, what a district that is. That is going to be one heck of a district. And Forney, Longview, North Forney, Rockwall Heath, Tyler Legacy, that's another one that caught my attention. But that District 11, Cedar Hill, Dallas Skyline, DeSoto, Duncanville, Lancaster, Mesquite Horn, and Waxahachie. I mean, give me a break, man.
And you cover the prospects. I mean, is there a way to put a ballpark on how many D1 prospects play in that district? I mean, that's crazy. I'm sure somebody will do the numbers, but that is a very talented district.
Well, I can tell you this. Kyle Flood was by Cedar Hill yesterday to see an offensive tackle. Steve Sarkisian was by Dallas Skyline to see the big-time linebacker and every other coach. DeSoto obviously has a number of guys. Duncanville has 30 D1 guys in the program. The 2025, the junior receiver Emmanuel Choice has Texas, Oklahoma offers like that. Mesquite Horn has one of the top offensive tackles, Lamont Rogers, in the country, who's at Texas Junior Day, as well as a number of 2026 kids. I'm guessing, let's just say there's all those schools combined, fresh sophomore through senior class, 75 Division I prospects there.
Oh, man. Scouts and people like Jerry Hamilton.
People are saying, no, that's an exaggeration. People are saying that's an exaggeration. It's not. Duncanville had 30 Division I kids, freshman through senior class in their program last year. So just start there and work up.
That's crazy. That's crazy. We're watching the Senior Bowl here, Jerry. We got a couple of Longhorns up there. Tavondre Sweat, Christian Jones. I think the tape that I've seen and the 5 highlights I've seen of Tavondre and Christian Jones, both are helping themselves pretty significantly here. And you can't move too far, but man, if you're a guy like Christian Jones, you can show you can play guard and tackle. I think Christian's had a really good week so far. What's your thought?
Yeah, no doubt about it. I mean, I think it's a huge week for both those guys. People could say, well, it's a huge week for every player. But I'll say this. The Big 12 this last year, and I talked to somebody who's actually part of the Senior Bowl, and they said in the NFL scouts' eyes, the Big 12 was a little down on the line of scrimmage this year. So Tavondre Sweat going out and performing against many of the best offensive linemen in the country that are draft eligible, and Christian Jones doing the same. If they go out and have really good weeks, that has a chance, especially with Christian Jones, to really elevate the draft stock. Because again, the Big 12 this year, was not considered one of the best line of scrimmage leagues as far as NFL prospects, especially on the interior of the offensive line when you're talking about Sweat and Murphy, who obviously Murphy's sitting out this week. But Christian Jones, like you said, showing that versatility, great opportunity for him. And if that body quickness holds up in pass protection against the edge and defensive line talent there, then it's a big week for him.
No question about that. And man, when you saw him in the early part of his career and then into the middle of it, you would have never thought he'd be a draft pick. Now he's maybe playing himself into a middle round draft pick in the NFL, which shows the development and Kyle Flood's ability, and then his work is to get better and better as a guy who was pretty new to football when he got to high school. Hey Jerry, the Senior Bowl itself, I know we've talked about. I'd love your thoughts on Jim Nagy, the director of the Senior Bowl, talked about how the back end of their Senior Bowl roster got gutted because of so many guys going back to school. I mean, Jahdae Barron and Alfred Collins were two guys that could have been there, but decided to come back because they wanted to improve their draft stock. And Jim Nagy talked about how NFL personnel are looking at this thinking, man, the rounds 6 and 7, even into round 5, we're not going to have the prospects we thought we were. And that's the impact of NIL and players coming back. Also, the juniors not leaving early, they're coming back and playing. It's good for the big picture of the industry, but at least for this year and maybe next year because of COVID years, the back end of the NFL draft is going to be tough to find draftable players for a lot of teams.
Hey, that's great news for the 32, 33-year-old guys holding on a couple extra years, right? I mean, first off, try to get through that at the end of their careers. But, yeah, I think it's interesting. It really – not that there's not already, but it places such a premium on the evaluation process in these first 4 or 5 rounds now. I mean, because that late round talent, there might not be as many guys as there have been, at least right now, as we're kind of moving through the NIL and seeing how all this is going to settle and what's going to happen long term. But it really puts a lot of pressure on that evaluation process, more so than ever. But I think it's like I said, my first initial reaction to that was for the guys still hanging on at the end of their NFL career. That's actually not a bad thing for them. They get another year to make a little money, right?
I think you're exactly right about that because those young players drafted in those rounds can become cheap labor because you got them under control for a few years once you draft them. And of course, when you got veteran players, they're making the veteran minimum, which is a lot more than those rookies make in the early part of their career. But yeah, it'll be interesting to see. But it does make it. We can say we want about the state of college football, and we know it needs some restrictions and rules put in place and all those things. But man, the talent when you got these guys coming back, I was seeing some tweets from Matt Miller, the ESPN draft scout, talking about how a guy like for the Longhorns. I mean, some of the Alfred Collins, we mentioned Jahdae Barron, Isaiah Bond. These guys. I mean, Trey Moore. These guys are already on their draft watch list, right? They're already watching these guys for where they would slot and peg. This is big. I mean, the Longhorns have filled some real key needs through the portal with several guys that likely would have been drafted in this year's draft had they decided to go out.
Andrew Makuba as well probably fits into that, right? So, I mean,
right
that is absolutely true. I mean, there's a chance that Texas, this team next year, will have more guys drafted than this draft in April. I mean, and at the beginning of the season, that's just how the portal is and NIL for the power schools, for the Blue Bloods, let's be real. But how it's really changed the game here is there's no reason. One of the things I look at with these blue blood college programs, whether it's football, basketball especially, but we're talking football, there's no reason to be an inexperienced team anymore, right? I mean, there's no reason to say, oh, man, we're losing 9 guys to the draft. We might have a little slight pullback here next year. No, not if you're a blue blood, not when you can go out in the portal. Obviously, some of it's timing. Nick Saban's retirement helps, obviously. But there's something, the coaching carousel every year, which makes the portal so much more impactful to me. But, yeah, I mean, you look at Texas, so you talk about Moore, Makuba, Bond, Niblack out of the portal is 4 guys. Matthew Golden, I mean, Silas Bolden's probably a free agent type of guy just because of size, but he's a little water bug now. But then you add those to the guys returning, Quinn, Kelvin Banks, you get the Alfred Collins, Jahdae Barron, as you mentioned. Terrence Brooks would be a draft eligible. You start getting to those Cam Williams if he has a great year as a draft eligible guy, right? I mean, so you start getting to some of those guys and the talent of this team. And, Texas fans, we talked about all year on Texas football. Texas is going to have more guys drafted than they ever have in like a in a 7-round draft. Well, I think they're going to eclipse that next year based on what they got in the portal and guys that are going to be draft eligible returning on this team.
Yeah, Jerry Hamilton, great stuff right there with On Texas Football and On 3 Sports, and you're right about that. We're going through the numbers now, but man, and next year, a guy like Kelvin Banks and Quinn Ewers, if he has a really good junior year, could be at the top of the draft. I mean, Byron Murphy's likely the top Longhorn this year, but you'll have some guys at the top of that draft, which is good signs for the Longhorns, who are developing players, recruiting and acquiring guys very well, and then developing them for the next level. Real quick, some breaking news has just dropped, which we'll talk about more coming up. But Dan Quinn has been hired, according to multiple reports, by the Washington Commanders to be their new head coach. Dan Quinn leaving the Cowboys. He will be the Washington Commanders' new head football coach, according to Ian Rappaport, and now ESPN has the story. So any thoughts on that there, G, or is that outside of your level of expertise, which nothing is, by the way?
No, I originally heard that Seattle was the place he wanted to go. Ideally, if he was going to go, obviously Seattle went a different direction. Dan Quinn has a house out in Hawaii. Loves the West Coast, even though he's an East Coast guy. I was told by a couple of people that Seattle would have been probably his top choice. I'm not as locked in on that, but that's just what I'd heard in the coaching community. But there's also a little more breaking news here. Billy Glasscock, who heads up recruiting for the University of Texas, is leaving to go to Ole Miss. So the coaching carousel, whether it's on the field or off the field, continues, right? So Steve Sarkisian's looking for a new guy to run the University of Texas recruiting department.
Wow, that's big news right there that just dropped. That just happened this morning. Any word on why? Lane Kiffin obviously doing a good sell job.
Yeah, I don't have any info on that. I think that caught everybody off guard, and because it's not as publicized, right, as an assistant coach. So a lot of times those things can kind of work behind the scenes a little bit more, and then boom, then it just happens. But that one surprises me a little bit. I'll be honest, but I have not heard the reason why.
All right, so we'll look for that. Dan Quinn in Washington, and Sark's looking for a new director of recruiting, according to Jerry Hamilton, who's with us right now. Jerry, while we're on the portal, before we gave you the breaking news, I haven't heard your thoughts, and gotten your thoughts for our audience on the portal additions that came in a little later. Isaiah Bond and Niblack, the tight end. How big are those? I mean, you followed those players when they were coming out of high school. I mean, these are two big gets, especially when you're replacing the likes of Xavier Worthy and A.D. Mitchell and Jatavion Sanders.
Yeah, I'm gonna say this, and I know this could come back and haunt me, but you get my real opinion. I think Texas may be a more explosive offense next year than they were this year. And people are like, what was Xavier Worthy, A.D. Mitchell? I get it, but JT Sanders, but Niblack is a true down the field threat at tight end. I mean, he's wide receiver speed when he opens up his gate now. He is a real vertical threat at the tight end position. Isaiah Bond runs 10.5. I mean, and I'll tell you this, Silas Bolden he may be 5'8.5", 160, but he plays bigger. He is quick and fast. He can get behind you as well. I think Texas has real speed at multiple positions coming in. And I'm not sure Niblack will catch as many passes as JT Sanders, but I think his yards per catch, some of the big plays, maybe even more so. And that's saying something because JT made a lot of big plays. I don't think you're going to see him in a tight end screen game as much. I think you're going to see him as more of a vertical threat. I think Bond, Niblack, Bolden, defensive coordinators are going to be looking at Texas saying, whoa, they got even faster this year than they were last season when they made the college football playoffs. So I think offensively now, Quinn's got to keep that elbow and shoulder iced in the offseason, man. That ball's going to be flying down the field this next year. And intermediate game, the opposite field hash, 18-yard comebacks with these guys with great speed. And Niblack just down the seam and what Sark can do to scheme all these guys open. I think this roster of offensive skill guys is really scary from a speed perspective. And I'll also say this, Bolden had a punt return for a touchdown last year. Matthew Golden had 2 kickoff returns for touchdowns last year. They lost some key guys, Worthy and Keelan Robinson, in the return game. And moving into the SEC, where chunk plays really matter, because the Big 12 is a great coaches conference. Talent-wise, it's not great in terms of the talent you're going to see week in, week out in the SEC. That doesn't mean all the SEC teams are better. The talent, all you have to do is follow the NFL draft every year. Those playmakers, those chunk yardage playmakers are going to be so big. And what they did in the return game, along with wide receiver, I think is big. I think Makuba's a huge get out of the portal. Especially with Baron Jade coming back, right? And then you add Phil Simi and Jordan Johnson-Rubell as high school safeties. I think that the safety nickel position is really strong at Texas next year as well. So obviously Moore can rush the passer at a high level. Now, he's not as long levered as some guys are, so playing the run, he might get attacked a little bit on the edges in the SEC by those big NFL offensive linemen, but he is a really good pass rusher. Colin Simmons brings the pass rush from the high school level. I think they address some needs in the program out of the portal really well to match with the high school needs they addressed. But I think they did great work in the portal. And, Kendrick Blackshire won't be talked about a lot, the inside linebacker from Alabama, but he gives you an adult in the room with experience at inside linebacker, which Texas won't have next year. So he's played, I believe, 100 snaps in the box in the SEC this year. So he has experience. He's got that size, and he's a good guy to match with Leonga Lafau while Leonga Lafau continues to develop. I think Texas did really good work. Savea as a point of attack guy on the defensive line, obviously was recruited by Johnny Nansen out of high school from Desert Pines in Las Vegas at UCLA, then transfers to Arizona when Nansen goes to Arizona, now goes to Texas. So Nansen must be a really good recruiter, by the way, for Texas fans out there. But he's a good point of attack, anchor, run game, defender. So I think they've addressed needs. They got to get another D tackle in the portal in the spring. And if they do that, and he's a guy that can play 25, 30 snaps and be a highly productive player, I think Texas may be a better team next year.
Wow, that's interesting. Yeah, and your experience at quarterback, you had all that speed because if you think about it, it makes sense that last year's receivers, Xavier Worthy was the one that took the top off your defense, and you just saw the speed jump off the screen. But Isaiah Nair, A.D. Mitchell was more of a technician in the ball skills and the route running, and we'll see what his speed looks like when he gets to the combine coming up. And then Jordan Whittington was more of a running back out there once he got the ball in his hands. But these guys are just all speedsters. I mean, you're putting a track team out there with an experienced O-line and a third-year quarterback. Then you put a Jaden Blue in the backfield, who's one of the fastest running backs in the country, potentially. I mean, you got defenses on their heels. Trying to deal with all that speed, which opens up a lot of opportunities for Sark and his creativity with an experienced QB. Jerry Hamilton is with us, talking all things football, Longhorn offseason. The winter workouts have begun. The All-Star games are being held this week. Also, Jerry, some Texas basketball. We've had conversations. Frustrating loss Monday night that we talked about. Game was there for you, but, man, missed free throws, too many second-chance opportunities for Houston and that great rebounding team that they are. But I think Longhorns showed in that game that they can really play with anybody, but at the same time they have deficiencies. I said that earlier, that they seem like they're really close, but at the same time they're 3-5 in this conference, so they're kind of a mile away from being where they want to be. What's it going to take for Rodney Terry's team to find a win over TCU, who's now ranked and on a roll on Saturday, and get themselves on a roll and back into contention for March Madness?
I mean, the scary thing is the easiest part of the schedule in the Big 12's already happened for me, for Texas. I mean, even though Texas Tech was a home game, at Cincinnati, at West Virginia, UCF at home, I think that's a rough loss. That's one that could maybe look back upon and say, man, that one proved costly. But yeah, like you said, at TCU, Iowa State at home, obviously West Virginia at home, but then you're at Houston. The next 4 games, 3 ranked opponents. There's no off nights in the Big 12, but that's a really tough 4-game stretch. And look, I think that they just have to play through Disu and Asmus. We've talked about on the offensive end. They have to play through those guys. Everybody else has to be complimentary off those guys. And I think they've made some strides in that area. I think there's been times where they've looked really good offensively. You got to get the right guys to the free throw line at the right time. I think that's big in the late shot clock. Who is in that 2-man game in the late shot clock, especially the last 4 minutes of games? I think that's going to be huge moving forward on the road in the Big 12. But I think, look, you got to play. U of H is a very physical team. I mean, for people that love Rick Barnes teams, right? Kelvin Sampson, Rick Barnes, they had some real just slugfest physically back in the day in the Big 12. And Kelvin Sampson's still having slugfest against Texas now, right, at Houston. I think the teams that really are physical are going to give Texas the most issues right now. I think this game against Houston, though, will be great for Rodney Terry and the staff to get a point across to their guys. Look, we have to turn it up a notch physically. We have to maximize that. I know they're more of a finesse team. They're really talented on offense in a lot of areas, but they're going to have to match some physicality on the road rebounding the basketball. There's no doubt about it.
Yeah, and then there's the Dylan Mitchell problem for me because we've talked with you, Jerry, and we've talked here on the show, Rod and I. Dylan is a very talented player, man. His athleticism just is tremendous. But as you said, you can't play him at the 3 position because his offensive game's not developed enough. He can't shoot and stretch the floor. So then we found out the other night you put him at the 4, and he gets kind of pushed around in the rebounding game. But it runs through Dessou and Asmus. What do you do with Dylan Mitchell? What's the best course of action moving forward against this schedule that they have to play?
Yeah, I think it's kind of is what it is right at this point, and I think I'm glad they moved away from the big lineup, and obviously I think part of that was Dessou coming back, but I think also was just kind of the team figuring out the rotation, the roles on this team, the players and the staff, right, as they build this team out and try to maximize it the best they can. But yeah, the big lineup with Mitchell and Cunningham, there just wasn't enough floor spacing. Just no way there could be enough floor spacing in the college game. It's such a spacing game now at all levels of basketball. But Dylan Mitchell, the other issue is got to make free throws. I mean, that's the tough thing is you need his athleticism on the court, and he is your leading rebounder, even though he does get beat physically because he's not really a 4, not against a rugged team, let's say. But then, he's got to be able to step to the line late in the game, and you got to be able to say, okay, this guy's going to make free throws, or you have to sub in, sub out. So for defensive purposes, sub him out on the offensive end if you can. So there's just it's a tough mix. It's tough to get this mix right on this team with this staff right now. But I think at the end of the day, going away from the big lineup, I think is the best thing Texas can do offensively, because I think the offensive struggles are going to outweigh the defensive struggle or the defensive gains. Because if you play that big lineup, you're trying to cover smaller guards, but without floor spacing in this league, it's too easy to defend.
That's why he's Jerry Hamilton, the best in the biz, whether we're talking football or basketball, even a little NFL in there. He dropped that for you. And the breaking news from Texas, we appreciate it. He is back on Texas football. Had to take a little hiatus there, Jerry, but you're back, and you'll be on every morning, right, with the Coffee and Football Show on the On Texas Football channel. What else are you going to be doing at OTF there with Bobby and the crew?
Yeah, and on TexasFootball.com, the site as well. So excited about it. Great team there, obviously. Love doing college football Saturdays with you, the watch with us, Rod Davers. Great team. We have a lot of fun, and I couldn't be more excited.
I'm glad you're back and glad to see you there. And we'll chat again soon. Thank you, Jerry. Have a great weekend, and we'll talk maybe next week and talk some Texas basketball. Get a Super Bowl pick from you as well.
There you go. Let's do it, guys. All right, man.
All right, Jerry Hamilton, there you go, on 3 Sports and, of course, on Texas football.
Good stuff there from Hook 'em Up with Ian Robbie, weekday morning 6 to 11 right here on the Horn. We'll come back, get to your text messages, 512-447-3776, 512-447-3776. You got any opinions on the NBA, college basketball, or the NFL and the big hiring of Dan Quinn to the Commanders? We'll get more into that in the 5 o'clock, but I want to hear what you guys think too. And the poll of the day, who do you think should be the next defensive coordinator for the Dallas Cowboys? Who should be the next defensive coordinator for the Dallas Cowboys? Let us know on the text line, 512-447-3776. We'll get to that. We'll get to more talk as we get back here on the Sports Complex on the Horn 1019, AM 1260, the Horn app, and hornfm.com. Back on the Sports Complex here on the Horn. Playing Grammy Award winners with double-digit Grammy wins all week long here on the show. Well, at least until we get through today, and then we'll have a 5-1-2 Friday tomorrow. That Jerry Hamilton interview that is run a little bit long, but that's all good. We got a lot more coming up in hour two. On the text line, we did get this one, though. I'll share this one before we get there. We'll talk some more NFL and Dan Quinn and defensive coordinator for the Cowboys a little bit more here in hour two. But this text, it says, holy crap, just switch to the Horn FM app. It's so much better than trying to listen to you guys on the FM dial. Why didn't you tell me? I think we've been telling you to go get the app and download the app. Depending where it is, the signals are not always great for the AM or the FM. You can listen on 101.9 AM, FM, 1260 AM, wherever you're at. If those aren't coming in great, you can listen to the Horn app anywhere in the world. So why not download that Horn app, and you'll get a great way to listen to the Horn everywhere you're at. It's easy to download. Go and download it and check it out. But yes, you should. I appreciate you letting us know that it's working well. I appreciate you out there. Text line's open, 512-447-3776. We'll get to some text when we come back here on the Sports Complex, talking some NFL. Dan Quinn to the Commanders. What are their options at the defensive coordinator position for the Cowboys? We'll get into that. We may get into some quarterback talk as well, depending on what you guys want to talk about there on the text line. Let us know. We'll get into it here in hour two, coming right back on the Sports Complex in the Horn 101.9, AM 1260, the Horn app, and hornfm.com. Hour 2 on the Sports Complex. Get into some NFL talk with the big hiring of the last head coach in football and the NFL. Coaching carousel is, well, we'll say slowing down. I mean, there's still coordinators to be hired, and I think there's still a GM spot that may be open, but the coaching carousel, for the most part, is dying down. Get into that. Get into some quarterback talk as well. And text line, of course, as well. 512-447-3776. 512-447-3776 is the text line number. You guys drive the show. We just try to keep it on the rails. Whatever you guys want to talk about, send it in. And as long as it's not graphic or obscene and it has something to do with sports, we'll usually try and talk about it. Try and give you some. I can't give you everything. I don't know everything. I'm not a know-it-all. I'm just right about what I do know. I'll tell you that. I'm right about what I do know. Text in 512-447-3776. And our poll of the day today is, who should the Dallas Cowboys hire as their defensive coordinator for next season because of Dan Quinn getting the Commander's job? We'll get back into that in a second. A little recap for some Texas football news, just to get your watching ready for tonight, that the East-West Shrine Bowl is tonight. If you want to watch that game, if you made me not aware that it is tonight and not over the weekend, East-West Shrine Bowl is tonight at 7. There's only one Longhorn that is going to be playing in the game. Ryan Watts will be on the West team if you want to check him out. JT Sanders and Jonathan Brooks both took invites, but due to injuries, of course, Jonathan Brooks' injury, and then JT Sanders jumped out at the last second as well. So Ryan Watts will be the guy, but he is one of those people in these games that make it fun to watch because he's fighting for a roster position in the NFL. He's fighting to be able to be drafted or a unsigned free agent that gets picked up right away, and he doesn't have to waddle on the practice squad or try and build his way up. He will be able to get in. That's what Ryan Watts is starting to fight for right now. That'll be tonight at 7 o'clock. And, of course, the Senior Bowl is on Saturday. If you're wondering where those other seniors are going to be, Tavondre Sweat and Christian Jones putting up great performances there at the Senior Bowl. Tavondre Sweat, the highlights that you're seeing pop out on the internet today look amazing. Christian Jones had looked good. His highlights yesterday, both their draft stocks seem to be rising out of this. Again, you always look at these, and a lot of guys kind of already have somewhat of their mind made up. But for a guy like Tavondre Sweat, who is a borderline first-round pick that is not a lot of people putting there, somebody may find him and say, this guy may be the next big thing. Byron Murphy, of course, backed out last minute due to some injuries, wanted to be ready for the combine, get ready for the combine, so he is not participating in the Senior Bowl. Jalen Ford and Jordan Whittington both took invites but will not be part of the roster playing on Saturday. So a little update there for you. And then let's get into some NFL talk as we get into the Commanders. And the big news today was that the Commanders did hire Dan Quinn. It was not a great look for the Commanders program, and it's probably not a great look for Dan Quinn, but it ends up this way, and that's going to be the marriage for now at least. We know that Dan Quinn most likely wanted to go to Seattle, and he probably thought that when Pete Carroll was moved out that was his job to lose, that he was going to be the front runner. I believe they decided it was time for a little bit of change. They went in with Mike Macdonald. Mike Macdonald, too, and from everything we've heard, his interviews were just next level, that everyone was really just impressed with him. Now, what that means once you get on the field is a different thing. We've known guys who've interviewed well and not coached great. But his interviews apparently got him the job. Dan Quinn then goes back. And Commanders were, what everybody's heard, were all in on Ben Johnson. They were going to make the move to hire Ben Johnson, the Detroit Lions offensive coordinator. However, he decided to stay in Detroit because he wants to win a game there, and it might be that the price wasn't matched. We've heard that he had a high asking price. It might be that he didn't have enough say in the structural organization of how he's going to build his offense and what he wanted to do, and maybe he said, Sam Howell's not my guy. Can we go get this guy? Whatever it is, he decided he was not going to take that Commander's job. They were left kind of scrambling and trying to find somebody. And I don't think it's completely that they were trying to find. Dan Quinn is a heck of a coach. I'm not trying to throw any shade on Dan Quinn, but it does mean that he gets the job there. I think it's not the worst hire. It's not going to sell you any season tickets. It's not going to get you the big pat on the back, that you made the greatest hire. but it could be an interesting hire. Someone who has been around before, been in some good programs, worked with other good head coaches. And, he's somebody that has also hired well in the past as well. We know he had Sark on his staff at one point, Kyle Shanahan on his staff at one point. So he's hired some good coordinators as well. So we'll see who he brings in with the Cowboys. If they keep Eric Bieniemy there, he is the offensive coordinator, or was last season. We'll see where he ends up. But that is Dan Quinn going to the Commanders. It also now means that with the news that came out a couple days that Kellen Moore was going to be, or most likely going to the Eagles, or going to the Eagles, that means that the Cowboys are now facing Dan Quinn, their former defensive coordinator, twice a year in Washington, and facing Kellen Moore twice a year in Philadelphia. I don't think that Jerry Jones is thrilled about that. I think there's a part of it where you got to be happy if you're Mike McCarthy that, that your coaching tree is growing and that these guys are getting jobs and people that have been under you are out there working hard. I think that's a good thing for, the general health of your organization, but you don't want to be in division. You prefer them to go out of conference, much less division, and both those guys end up in division, going to be playing the Cowboys. And speaking of the Cowboys, it does leave the Cowboys with some big questions as a team where the defense did not show up in their playoff game, and the defense struggled in some games this season. And there were talks, some people were ready to move on from Dan Quinn, even though he brought a lot to that defense and made them elite at times, that it somewhat was like their offense, and elite in moments and then very much not elite in others. And so now when you start to look at what the Cowboys may do for their defensive position, their defensive coordinator position, you have to look at a couple of different options. And there's basically three main ways you can do it, and we'll start with the easiest way, which is you hire from within. And this would be probably the most logical way, because when you talk about hiring this defensive coordinator, Mike McCarthy's walking into this season with 1 year left on his contract. So going out and hiring a big-name defensive coordinator when it could all blow up next season, they could decide to get rid of everything and go get Bill Belichick next season or do whatever they're going to do next season. That's still an option. Then it seems a little bit harder to bring somebody in, because you're possibly on a 1 year deal and no big name is going to come in on that. So if you look in-house, the most common, most easy way to get in, there's some options that are in there. They've got 4 options I've got of people that are part of their defensive staff, people that have been around Mike McCarthy, people that were coaching with Dan Quinn that could keep some consistency in this defensive unit, keep them moving forward. First is one of the big names, Joe Witt Jr. He is somebody who has said his dream job is the defensive coordinator for the Cowboys. He was with McCarthy in Green Bay from 2008 to 2018. He's been coaching in the secondary a lot as well, as far as Al Harris, who's another name on our list. But Joe Witt Jr., somebody who's a very likely name to come up in the conversations, will definitely interview for the job, and someone Dan Quinn might take with him and hire him for the defensive coordinator position in Washington if he does not take the job in Dallas. Again, some of these guys may get picked off and go to Washington as well. Al Harris, another one, played for McCarthy but didn't coach with him. He was with the Chiefs from 2013 to 2018, been with the Cowboys since 2020, but very much liked by the players, very much liked by fans. Al Harris is definitely a name that I think a lot of Cowboys fans will be good with to give him a shot, and he's one of those guys, again, when you talk about what the Cowboys situation is right now with Mike McCarthy, that you give Al Harris a deal, and worst case scenario, it doesn't work out for him. It doesn't work out for Mike McCarthy. Everything blows up. You gave it to a guy that you appreciate. Moving forward, he may not take that as a bad sign, and you may be able to keep him on a staff, even if he's not the DC, or he can go move on and do whatever else. But a hiring that I think players and everyone else in the Cowboys organization would be just fine with happening, but it may not give you that edge that you feel you need to improve the defense. It depends on how he interviews and what he decides he would want to bring into that organization. A couple other names for you. The linebackers coach, Scott McCurley, he spent 13 years with Mike McCarthy at Green Bay. Maybe that trust and knowing Mike McCarthy, maybe that's a name that he fights for the defensive coordinator. I'll tell you again, though, I don't think Mike McCarthy is necessarily the guy hiring this coordinator, knowing what Jerry Jones is. I would assume Jerry Jones has a much bigger hand in it than Mike McCarthy, which is not how most hirings go. I think Mike McCarthy's going to tell him. Mike McCarthy's going to have some options and give him plans and say, these are the guys I'd like, but Jerry Jones is going to have final say on that. But Scott McCurley's on there, and Aiden Durde, defensive line coach, he's actually had interviews with the Packers and the Rams and the Falcons for their DC position. So if we say the hottest name, he's the younger, hotter name that hasn't been a coach for as long. He's a hot name right now. Maybe they just take him instead of losing him. They keep him with the Cowboys. However, I know he got those offers to go out there. I don't know if the D-line necessarily performed at the highest level in some of those situations involving the run game. I don't know if he's the right fit for what they want to do, but he's another one that they're definitely going to have to talk to within the organization. Now, once you go outside of that, now you start going into the names of big-name coaches, and we can say Bill Belichick, but that I don't see any reality where Bill Belichick ends up coaching as a defensive coordinator when we realize one of the reasons he didn't go to Atlanta was the power struggle. One of the reasons he didn't go to Washington was because it's all believed he wants too much power and he wants to make the draft picks and he wants to be in charge. The reason that the Patriots moved on was because they were saying they didn't want him to have the power to have the draft picks and everything. Bill Belichick basically said that doesn't work for him. So I can't imagine he's going to come in and just coach the defense. That seems, even though, Jerry Jones says they're friends, it doesn't seem like something that he's just going to lay back and do. I would imagine he would rather announce and wait another year to see if he can get a head coaching job. But who knows? Stranger things have happened in the world, but I don't think Bill Belichick's a real option. Another name that we haven't really heard bandied around with them, but he is a great defensive coach, did not get hired. Mike Vrabel, a really good defensive coordinator, a great defensive mind, could be somebody that they look at, say, well, you come on in here. We don't expect you, we expect you're going to get a head coaching job or be back into it next year anyway. So the fact that it's 1 year may not scare you off. That may not be the worst thing you've ever seen because you could come in here and bring us some toughness that maybe we've been lacking at points. Maybe get us a little bit more hard-nosed on that defensive end. That Dan Quinn was very much finesse, and we'll keep a little bit of the finesse, but give us a little bit more of that hard nose where we'll start stopping the run a little bit better. And if we can bring in that in and keep an Al Harris, keep a Joe Witt Jr. on the staff, if you're able to keep some of those guys from the Dan Quinn staff with Mike Vrabel and give him basically a year to go in there and say, this is it. We know at the end of the year, this is probably all blowing up, and we'll figure it out then too. Then that's possibly another option for you. Probably not very likely, but an option. And then Ron Rivera, another name, with Dan Quinn replacing Ron Rivera. Ron Rivera has been a name that has been tied to it that he doesn't necessarily want to give up coaching, but he's not going to be in the head coaching realm right now at his age and with, the lackluster last few positions that he has been at. Then maybe bringing him in as a DC and seeing him bring in there and bring some more toughness, but still a positive attitude. His culture is not really a great culture, but it's a culture that is a little bit more upbeat from what people say. So he could be a little bit more fitting into Jerry Jones, where he wants everybody to be family, and Mike McCarthy, where they want to be family. That is another option that he could be pulling out. And I'll throw at you one more option that is an interesting one for what the Cowboys could do, because this is a big conversation right now that a lot of college coaches are looking to move to the NFL. People that maybe wouldn't have done it a few years ago are now looking at the landscape and having to work nonstop 365 days a year because you're keeping your own players and you're trying to recruit others, and there's a transfer portal and you're trying to, and everything that goes into it, that some people believe the quality of life is better as a pro coach than a college coordinator or college coach. And somebody may go in and try and take the step, and maybe somebody from the college ranks. Maybe you look at the Big Ten and some of those schools. I know Manny Diaz in Penn State, probably not going to be the guy that Cowboys fans would get super pumped about. But, Iowa has a good defensive coordinator. We know Minter is probably going to Michigan with Jerome Harbaugh, so you're not going to be able to poach him off. But there are other names of defensive coordinators who are good coordinators or defensive coaches, possibly, maybe from a smaller school that moved up and got jobs as a head coach, where you could look at them and say, well, would you want to make the move up? And we're already playing this kind of hybrid style that's a little bit different from Dan Quinn. And if you're coaching from the college ranks, maybe you could help us change and keep, kind of a fresh, different look at this defense. It's another possible scenario for the Cowboys to look at. Whether if you're not going to stay in house, and if Dan Quinn if those guys want to go with Dan Quinn, or if you don't feel that those guys are going to bring you what you need to see, and if Jerry Jones wants to make a splash, which we know he wants to make a splash, but how much does he want to win versus how much does he want to make a splash? He could go out there and shell out some bucks to go try and get a coach from the college ranks to bring them up. We've seen it happen already this coaching cycle, so it's a real opportunity that college coaches may be looking at and the Cowboys may be looking at. It's just you just go out there and see if there's a college guy who maybe just burn out. Man, they're recruiting everything else. Man, forget it. You're not recruiting. We're getting the offseason. You got to scout for us. You got to go to the Senior Bowl. It's on weekend. You already know those guys, right? All right, now you got to go and you've got to check out the combine. All right, we'll have some draft meetings, but if you want to go to the beach, enjoy yourself. You get a holiday now. You can hang out with your family. It's another possible option for the Cowboys. They try and find a defensive coordinator. Once the cycle's over, you may have to think a little bit more outside the box instead of being able to go find the best guy because you are way behind the eight ball. Your coach is the last head coach hired. You have to go out there and find something, outside the box. Maybe you look at college. Maybe you go that way. And that's what we're asking you on the text line, 512-447-3776 on the text line. If you guys want to have your suggestions of who you think should be the defensive coordinator for the Cowboys next season, send that in. That's the poll today. Who should be the DC for the Cowboys next season? Send that in on the text line, 512-447-3776. Anything else you want to talk about, NFL, NBA, college, send that stuff in, and we will get to it here on the Sports Complex. We'll come back and get to some of your text messages and places to have them hook them up when we come back here on the Sports Complex in the Horn 1019, AM 1260, the Horn app, and hornfm.com. Back on Sports Complex here on the Horn, just letting it play. Foo Fighters there for you on the Grammys. All double-digit Grammy Award winners. Foo Fighters got them double-digit Grammy Awards as well. Everyone we played this week will be in a 512 Friday tomorrow, getting you some local music you can check out and support on a Friday like we like to do here on the Sports Complex. Text line's open. 512-447-3776. Poll of the day. Who should be the next DC for the Cowboys? Who is it? Dan Quinn is gone. Who should be the next DC? We just went through some options. All the options inside that probably make the most sense. But if you want to make a splash, and Jerry likes to make a splash, give you some other options. What do you guys think on the text line? Chan says Bill B or Mike G. I'm guessing Mike V. I don't know who Mike G is. Mike V. Who else is available for the Cowboys? And I can attest to the app working overseas. I listen to all in Singapore and Morocco. Appreciate that, Chan. Always appreciate you listening in. Texter says Parsons has no DC loyalty, posting he might go to Commanders with Big D Torres. Yes, Parsons has no loyalty. He says he may go. In reality, we understand that it's going to come down to negotiations and the money, and then it's going to be hard for other teams to find the cap space to go out and go get a Micah Parsons, and I think he'd rather stay than go. But you never know. You never know with the Micah Parsons, and if he wants to go play with Dan Quinn somewhere else, so you don't know if you want to bring somebody in that he likes. So if you bring in an Al Harris, is that somebody he likes? Do you want to bring in somebody that he might think? Is he a fan of Joe Witt Jr.? I'm sure. I think if Jerry is smart, he will at least talk to Micah Parsons and get his opinion on who might be a guy to bring in. Their text says, still hating. I know. You're haters. You're going to hate. That's just what it is. Text say, Cowboy hired Vrabel as DC, and he takes over as head coach next year. I think that's possible, but I don't think Mike Vrabel is a big enough name that really – I don't think that's a name that Jerry would necessarily go all for. So I don't think he may next be the guy in waiting because he's not the most, outgoing. Like Dan Quinn was a guy you could put in because he was, more electric and he had a fun, different system. I don't think Mike Vrabel's a bad hire if you brought him in as a Cowboys head coach, but I think he may be looking for something bigger if he does. And I don't think he would give anybody that coach in waiting position. We thought it was going to be for Dan. And again, it also is going to be, can Mike Vrabel come in, work with what's already there? Do they have to change up the defense more to bring in what he wants to do? How much of it is scheme change? How much of that can be done in 1 year? Because if you say, well, you're the coach in waiting, and then all of a sudden you're not the coach in waiting because we didn't like what your defense did. So now we think you suck and you shouldn't get a head coaching job. That all has to be looked at for Mike Vrabel as well if he wants to become a defensive coordinator. Like this, Gary Patterson to Dallas. I doubt that would happen. I think Gary Patterson's been out of it enough that he wouldn't be the young name that you'd want out of college. So I think if you're going in college, you're probably looking for someone that's, under 50. I think was probably what you'd be looking for to get a new, hot take. I don't know if Gary Patterson would be the burning headline. Even though, I get it. I like Gary Patterson. I think he's a heck of a coach again. But he was always kind of coaching lesser talent, so I don't know if he necessarily falls into that realm either. But it is an interesting name. I like the text because I would not have thought of that name. So I like that. But I'm not sure that that's necessarily the fit for the NFL. And I'm not sure he walked away because of all that stuff either. He maybe wanted to spend more time with family, but, that could be it. Hey, I want to get out of college, and if the NFL calls, it'd be interesting. I like that. Interesting thought, it's at least. Tech says the Cowboys defense just didn't seem to be as impressive to me as it was hyped up to be, especially in terms of defensive pass rush. Overall, they had 46 sacks, but 19 were in 3 games. The rest were they got 1 or 2 or 0 in the playoffs. So maybe this is what we need. Yeah, I agree. I think that was it. It was they fell into the same realm as what the offense did for the Cowboys, which was, we're going to have some games where we look like world beaters and we're going to dominate and everyone's going to come out and say that we're the best team in the NFL. And then we're going to have games where we look like we don't belong playing college football. And in reality, you can't have those. And it got worse in this year for Dan Quinn. There's probably ways to start fixing that, but that's why you want to bring in somebody. If you're going to bring in somebody within the organization, you have to say, well, how are you going to fix what happened? And how are you going to bring up a pass rush where, Dan Quinn talked about it at the beginning of last season, and I think it had to be true going into that season still, was that people knew what Micah Parsons was going to do, and especially once he just became, going to pass, rush the passer. It was much easier to defend the Cowboys when you kind of knew, well, they don't have the linebackers anymore to really exotic blitz us anymore. So we know the linebackers aren't really a problem. We know Lawrence and Micah Parsons are coming for us. We just got to stop them. But Hankins is in the run stopping. We kind of know what everybody's doing. So even though they're all positionless football, unless they send in one of those safeties, then there's nothing we're really not seeing. So it's more about, getting the ball off in time. So if we have enough time, we are able to block them because they're not showing us a bunch of different looks because of what they have and because they didn't have a ton of depth in that linebacker position to kind of show them different looks. Now they'll get Overshawn back next year, and Overshawn's another guy that can come in and be an impact player on this defense, though. That he would have been another piece to help that defense get a little bit more on the defensive line or the defensive pressure on the quarterback for sure. But yeah, I agree with you that there was points where they did not look as dominant as they should have looked. Another Vrabel with the promise of future head coach after firing, and you can't promise that. You just can't, because what if he's bad? You can't go, well, you're the head coach, and then he comes in and everyone doesn't like him and no one wants to put in the effort, and Micah Parsons says he's leaving. He says, I'm a Penn State guy and this is an Ohio State guy. I'm out of here. And they all players start wanting to get away. You're having to try and rebuild this whole defensive system, and you're now going to be doing that, and now you're firing Mike McCarthy because the defense was no good. The offense was still decent. I don't know if you can give him that head coach in waiting just willy-nilly and just say, no, that's you because you're Mike Vrabel. I think you just have to hire him and say, we know you will get a head coaching job next year. Whether it's here or not is, who knows? And Jerry Jones is the king of anything's possible and who knows. And I could still be working with Bill Belichick in the future. I could see myself doing that. Not saying, no, I don't see that, because I think Mike McCarthy is going to be our coach for the next 10 seasons because we're winning a Super Bowl next year and the year after and the year after. We're going all in. But that's not what Jerry. Anything could happen in Jerry's world. I like the texter. Random texter number 69 says, realistically, is there any recent former head coach who would even consider taking on the DC role under McCarthy and Jones? Bill B, hell no. Vrabel, probably another hard pass. Ron Rivera, why? Is there a college head coach that might be equal or possibly even an upgrade to Quinn? And you just hijacked my takes, and I couldn't text it faster than you were saying it. No, look, I think it's a good take. Great minds think alike there, random texter. It is. It's an interesting look because it's where you could bring in another different thinking process. Someone that when you're going up against Kellen Moore twice a year, and with the Eagles, and you're playing against Dan Quinn, and you're playing against, if you have to play Arizona and Shane Steichen, you're playing against coordinators who might know you pretty well, and you're trying to beat the 49ers who know what you do very well. If you bring in somebody else and that no one in the NFL maybe has the full knowledge of, and take that chance, if you're saying going all in, then that would be it, is bringing in a higher level name defensive coordinator or head coach from college ranks to be your defensive coordinator and really just try something different to make it work with the players that are there. So it's somebody also who Jerry Jones may really enjoy working with, because they're not going to be the person who has all the direct say in personnel because they're newer to the NFL. It's a possibility. I don't know if it'll happen, but it does seem like a Jerry thing where he could try and make a splash. I think he'd rather make a splash with an NFL name. I think he'd rather try and make a splash in a way where it's not so much a risk. I don't know if Jerry's that much of a risk taker, but I like the take, random texter. I'm a fan of it. That's why I said it as well. I don't think it's original to either one of us, but I think it's a good take. And Nate says, how about Al Harris? Al Harris is the guy. Like, I think he's definitely a name that's on there. He's one of the ones who gave. He's an interesting name to put on there. He just doesn't have a ton of experience. He does come from the Chiefs background, so he's got good background there of winning and what he could do with the Chiefs. And then he spent the time behind Dan Campbell. I think that the best part with Al Harris is, if you're talking about a 1-year rental tryout, which this could be if Mike McCarthy doesn't get it done, that if it works, great. But if it doesn't work, okay, well, we're getting rid of everybody every way anyway. So, it's not a huge problem. that Al Harris is not going to be sticking around. Maybe Cowboys can get PK so he can face guard the receivers. Shaking my head. I don't think they're going to go after PK. He's done a better job than some other defensive coordinators in Texas. He's still got some pieces to get together. Hopefully that secondary will continue to grow, and hopefully they'll be able to get a defensive lineman in the spring portal. That would be a big piece for them as well, because we know that losing Byron Murphy and T'Vondre Sweat is a big loss. But hopefully that defense will look even better next year. Hopefully it'll keep growing. As a Packer fans, Jerry should hire Todd Orlando. Yeah, I think if you're wishing it well, I don't know if Todd Orlando is going to be the splash hire that Jerry Jones would probably want. I think if he would hire Todd Orlando, he would probably go with Joe Witt Jr., Al Harris, or even the Aiden Durde, who is, he's gotten looks from other people, so he's got a mind for whatever reason. Either his agent's really good or what, but he may be somebody that leaves anyway if you don't. And then, okay, well, how's your new DC? If you hire Al Harris, is he keeping the defensive staff, or does he have people in the league he wants to give a shot to? If someone walks away or goes with, because you figure somebody's probably going to leave and go with Dan Quinn. So if you say somebody, at least one or two or three people go, who is Al Harris? Who's that defensive coordinator? Who is he bringing in? So a younger guy who may not necessarily know those, have all those connections, you'll see. But I'm not saying he doesn't, because I don't know if Al Harris does or not. Let's see. Manny Diaz is head coach at Duke. He left PSU. Very good, astute. That's why I like you texters. You keep me on my toes when I forget things that happened during the offseason, because I'm trying to write it all down and remember everything, and I don't. But you're exactly right. He left and went to Duke. I was trying to think of schools in the Big Ten had the defenses. We could debate whether it was all defense or was it just lack of offense. But they had the defenses. We know that. Jerry ought to try a Bill B trick and bring Kellen Moore back as DC. He has experience in stopping both Dallas and San Diego offense. All right, that's a solid one. I like that one. Plus, he's one of their guys. I like that text. That one got a real genuine laugh from me. That's funny. I don't think that would work. I think that might be a bad decision. Baylor head coach not going well in college. I don't know if he'd be the guy. Rand, I don't know if he would be. Again, that's not necessarily. I think if you're going for that, you want to go for this is the best defensive guy in college, or this guy's doing really well in college. I don't know if his. And he also, he does like smaller defenders, which, is somewhat a problem that the Cowboys have had, but it's kind of more of what their lineup is, using safeties as linebackers, trying to, they made Mozzie Smith lose weight to be a little bit more active. So I get it. But that falls into the Gary Patterson of, I'm not sure if that would be the way. R-Dub says Ron Rivera, and that's just a name I've heard. I don't know, how much, but if people are saying that he has interest in being a defensive coordinator, and basically there's not a lot of jobs left to go to, and he still wants to be a coach and wants to kind of try and redeem himself, then that's a place where it's at least a name you're bringing in. And if that's what Jerry Jones wants, and we know Jerry Jones gets what Jerry Jones wants, another one, Baylor Dave Aranda. And, that, he is. I put him in that realm of, I think we have a little bit more as Texas fans bias to that. I don't know if Jerry would have that same bias to Big 12 guys. I think, if you're going for a little bit bigger name. But that being said, I just said he does like he runs a smaller defensive line a lot of times and smaller players at Baylor and more speed. And that could fit in more with what they do. But again, that's also when you're going to have to talk to Micah Parsons. And if Micah Parsons walks out and goes, who? Baylor, who? I don't know. I don't want that guy. I don't want, no, go get me somebody. Go get me this guy. Or go get me Al Harris. Then you have to listen to the guys that you're trying to re-sign, because it's going to make it a lot harder to bring them in. And for Dave Aranda, I think he'd be giving up a lot of money that he's going to make when Baylor fires him. So he might want to just stick it out. And Nate also says Rex Ryan's eyebrow says he's ready to be my DC. I don't think Rex Ryan is coming back to be the DC either. But who knows? Jerry may got the money to steal him away from the desk. Keep those texts coming in, 512-447-3776. I like it. You guys had some good ones. You guys are doing awesome today. You caught me on one where I messed up, and then you got like the Gary Patterson, the Dave Arandas. College names, I'm a fan of it, man. You guys are kicking butt on the text line today, 512-447-3776. If you got any more takes, send those in. We're going to take our last break. We'll come back and we'll wrap it up here. And if any more texts come in, we'll hit those as well. We'll get to it here on the Sports Complex in the Horn 1019, AM 1260, the Horn app, and hornfm.com. on a fun Friday edition, trying to get you ready for the weekend and the Senior Bowl and the Pro Bowl and all the other bowls that aren't the biggest bowls, but we'll get to them when we get back here. We'll get back tomorrow afternoon. Until then, be kind, be safe, keep your underwear clean. We'll see you right back here tomorrow on the Sports Complex.